Are you tired of the daily grind? Are you worried that you're wasting the time of your life? It's called the rat race for a reason, and in this video we're going to talk about it and, more importantly, how to escape it. Hi, my name is Tyus. I make videos about personal liberty, living your freest life possible, escaping the rat race, which is something that I say in every video. However, this video is all about escaping the rat race. Did you know that a group of rats is called a mischief? So if you want to join in my mischief, hit the subscribe button below. And I should also warn that I am going to be using the term rat and mice pretty interchangeably in this video, just because I'm a simple-minded person and they're similar animals. I should also apologize in advance because I'm going to be extending a metaphor way too far. But in this video, I'm going to share with you 6 steps, 6 ways of escaping the rat race that we call life. So if you're trying to escape the rat race, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you don't fall into any of those rat traps. Mouse traps, whatever. You don't want to fall into traps. And in the human world, those traps are often referred to as scams or cons. Now, you've probably seen these kinds of things out there. The 3-card Monty is a classic where people are shuffling cards on the street corner and all you've got to do is pick out the right card and you win. Well, it's a scam. Nobody wins. Everybody's in on the game, and the game is not a game, it's a con. Or the romance scam, which goes back a long ways, but nowadays we refer to it as catfishing. Or salting, which is where back in the gold rush times, people would plant gold or gems inside of a barren mine that had no value in it. And when people would come along to buy a gold mine, they'd see, hey, this one has some gold in it just left behind. This place must be amazing. It must be such high value in it. And they would buy this gold mine, not realizing that there was no real value in that. Or another classic con is the pig in the poke, which is when people would buy meat in a bag. This is a long time ago as well. They would buy the pig, being the pig was the meat they were buying, and the poke was the bag. So a pig in the poke con is really a bait and switch. What they would do was they'd buy a pig. You'd see the shop owner put the pig in a bag to sell it to you, and he'd actually switch it out with a different bag that had a cat in it. The cats didn't have very much meat in it, so there wasn't a lot to eat. This is also where the term "let the cat out of the bag" comes from. And there are tons of other cons. Clip joint, a melon drop, a jam auction, a rip deal, a fiddle mill. These are all classic old school cons, but it doesn't even have to be a con that is orchestrated by somebody else upon you. Life has traps that we fall into. It's just part of who we are. For example, drug addiction is a very common trap that people fall into. High interest rate loans, or social dependency. These are situations where it's not necessarily somebody preying upon you, although it might be the case in high interest rate loans, but oftentimes these are just situations that we fall into as people. So how do you avoid these traps? Well, the simple way of avoiding them is to get educated about them. If you know what a trap looks like, you can avoid it. So when I was listing off those different cons, if some of those were like, what is that? What does that mean? What is that kind of con? If you didn't know what those meant, it simply means that you're just not aware of all of the different cons out there. And I did that for a reason. It was to point out that there's an opportunity in education for all of us to learn more about the traps that surround us so that we can avoid them. Another way of avoiding a trap is my second tip on escaping the rat race, which is be able to identify the bait, or when you are being baited. Bait is something that drives a rat into the trap. They go, ooh, that looks attractive, and they go right for it, and then they realize, oh my God, I've been trapped. And you might think, that doesn't happen to me, but if you're somebody who routinely picks up your cell phone only to play a game that is mindless and wastes your time, you are often or likely being baited by that game. If you spend tremendous amounts of time on social media, and most people are spending like 4 hours a day, if not more, on social media, that social media is probably baiting you. It is probably working through the systems of your psychology to make sure that you waste part of your day, part of your life in their platform. Another form of bait that I see constantly is a day job. It's nothing wrong with trading your time for money. However, if you trade your life for just enough money to get by, you'll realize that you spent your entire life helping somebody else build their dream rather than creating the dream life that you wanted for yourself. You fell for their bait by just taking a small paycheck. Advertising is around us constantly, and if you see those flashy lights and things that are trying to drive you toward one product, one service, they are likely trying to bait you, and identifying that is a way to avoid it. Now, how do you identify it? There's a couple of ways, but the best way is to use wisdom. And wisdom always beats experience. Experience is going after the bait and realizing, oh, I've been trapped, I'm not going to make that mistake again. Wisdom is learning from other people's actions. So, if a person puts their hand on a hot stove and burns their hand, they learned from experience that they shouldn't do that. But if you watched them and you went, oh, I'm never putting my hand on that hot stove, you just learned from wisdom. That is the way to make sure that you avoid getting baited. My next tip on escaping the rat race is to win the maze. Have you ever seen those old scientific studies where they would take a mouse and they'd put it into a little maze and have the mouse run through the maze in search of cheese? Well, that's pretty analogous to life. We do find ourselves in a situation where we're looking for that reward, going through, finding a lot of dead ends along the route. And most people are just trying to win. They're trying to get to that cheese. But I'm suggesting that you don't try and get the cheese, because oftentimes these paths, these mazes have been orchestrated. They've been designed by people to make sure that you reach a certain conclusion. And you know what they do when you reach the end of the maze? They pick up the little mouse and they put it in a different maze that's a little bit harder and a little bit more confusing and a little bit more difficult. You find that when you reach the destination that everyone's told you is the thing that you really ultimately want, it won't be what you really want, and you'll find yourself with just more confusion and more obstacles. So what do? Well, you look for an exit to the maze entirely. You don't look for the end result, the end win. You look for, how do I escape this process to begin with? This is kind of analogous to how we vote. We think we have choices. We think that how the people are going to vote is going to dictate the results of what we get. But it's really a false choice, because we have limited options. If we're only presented with two candidates that are controlled by massive companies or groups or lobbyists, then ultimately we really don't have a choice. What we have is the illusion of choice. About 300 years ago, it was very uncommon for people to go to colleges. Most people would just work throughout their entire life, and if you went to college 300 years ago, you were almost guaranteed to have success in life. Back then, going to college was escaping the rat race. It was escaping the daily toils and trouble of a conventional life of labor. But nowadays, things have changed. Now, college is easy to get into. There's so many colleges out there, there's so many loans available that you can pretty much guarantee that you'll be accepted if you really want to go to college. And what has been the result? Well, so many people have gone to college that is the new maze. Now people are successful that are dropping out of college. People like Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, Alicia Keys. These are all people that have left college because leaving college is now the thing that is escaping the rat race. Now, I'm not saying don't go to college. I'm not saying don't get an education. If anything, my previous points were to get an education. What I am saying is, if you find yourself on a predefined path, a path that was created for you by other people, it is likely that they are profiting by you taking that path. And it is in your best interest to take the road less traveled by, or better yet, create your own road. The next tip I have on escaping the rat race is to realize that it is okay to hide. Rats and mice are masters of the game of hide and go seek. And what I mean by this, as far as the analogy is concerned, is that avoidance is often the very best defense you have. Oftentimes, if you're forced into a situation where there's no win, sometimes it's best just not to play that game. There's an old martial artist, long dead, named Miyamoto Musashi. He was pretty much recognized as the greatest swordsman out of Japan. He was undefeated in 61 duels, and there's a lot of stories and variations of stories about him. But one of my very favorite stories about him, and it might not be true because lots of these have become almost mythological, is that he was challenged by a young swordsman. He was challenged to compete against them. They wanted to have a duel to the death. And Musashi said, "No, I'm not going to fight with you. Let's not do this." And the swordsman said, "No, I absolutely want to, let's go." And he said, okay, if you want to, then we'll spend a day resting, relaxing, and tomorrow we'll get on this boat and we'll go over to the island so that we are away from all the people and everybody else that we might hurt when we have a duel. And the young swordsman said, "Okay, let's do that." So the next day, Musashi and this young challenger jumps in a boat, and Musashi says, "You know what, I'm gonna row it across to the island for us. I'll use my energy so that you don't waste yours. I want to honor you. So he rows the boat across to this island, and he says, sir, I'd like you to depart onto the island first because I'm trying to honor you. I'm going to be very respectful. And the young challenger jumps off the boat, and Musashi turns the boat around and rows back to the mainland, leaving his challenger there. He realized that the best way to win this duel was not to engage in it at all. Now, as you find yourself going through this rat race we call life, it becomes very, very easy to engage heavily in the race and forget that we're also living a beautiful, wonderful life. So the point of this is, if you find an opportunity to enjoy that cheese, take it. I'm not saying live a life of gluttony. Gluttony is taking in too much excess, and that's easy nowadays because we don't have as much scarcity. But if you find things that are wonderful, that have zero scarcity to them, and you engage in that constantly, that is not enjoying the better parts of life, that is indulgence. And that often turns into something like addiction, which is one of those traps. However, if you find something scarce, if you find a beautiful moment, if you find a gorgeous view, take advantage of those moments. That is a part of living a wonderful life. And here's a little pro tip. All of our relationships have scarcity because all of us are in this life for a limited period of time. So if you find a wonderful moment to spend with your loved one, with your family, take that moment and embrace it and enjoy it for what it is, rather than taking it for granted and realizing that, oh, I've got to run to the next thing, I've got to engage in the race. Enjoy the moments. Have a nice piece of cheese. Thinking in the analogy that we're in a rat race makes us believe that we're competing against others constantly. But the truth is, the only way to really escape the rat race is to work with others, to understand that the relationships we have are vital and important. Whenever you have an opportunity to teach someone else, realize that teaching somebody else is going to help them by reducing their suffering. It's going to provide them with the wisdom that we talked about earlier. And it is ultimately the greatest chance we have of changing bad and repressive systems around us. So, whenever possible, work with people, not against people. This is not a situation where for you to win, somebody else has to lose. In fact, the greatest winners in this life, in this rat race, are those that find ways to provide more value to other people than anyone else. I hope you're enjoying these videos. I hope you subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so yet. Feel free to share these videos with like-minded people or those who need to see it. And I hope to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.